when you said officials here in Ohio, are you just talking about Congress, Ohio representatives of Congress, or is there an Ohio, a state budget component of this?
Yes.
Well, then can you zero in on that? What are you basically, I mean, as they wrestle with this budget and the tax shift and
they can clamp down on some of the accounting efforts that are going on when they calculate the state tax piece of it, which would create a situation where on their federal taxes, because they have to do this for state compliance, they could block some of these loophole efforts at the federal level by requiring them not to be allowed to do that at the state level. The state could also enact a worldwide combined reporting system that actually creates a situation where companies are then taxed based on where they actually do their business, not where they have this shell company. So what's happening now is the state can allow a corporation that has a shell company to be taxed based on where that is, but since the transactions and much of the activity goes on within the state could force those companies to tax themselves based on what actually happens in the state of Ohio. Now the state would argue that means that other states would have an unfair advantage, that other states need to do it. But we are in a spiral here if Congress fails to act, where people are being allowed to not pay their taxes.
The numbers we heard here, this is all federal taxes. So you don't have some state numbers, or do you, about how much? Now I don't mean how much Ohioans are paying extra to Washington, but I'm talking about the state. Right. State budget. You have some numbers?
Right. So if you look at the state of Ohio's budget and how much tax revenue we're losing due to tax dodging, it's a little different because here in Ohio there isn't technically a corporate income tax at the state level. It's done a little differently. But if you look just at individuals in Ohio dodging their state income taxes using tax havens, we're losing $707 million a year to the state budget in lost tax revenue.
And that could be fixed just by not so much through enforcement, but by changing the actual law?
Right. So most states right now define income. They just match what the federal government says. So when the federal government says, here's what we consider income and this is what we tax, most states just copycat off of that. What the state of Ohio could do is decouple our tax system from the federal tax system and say, well, that's not how we define income. We define income not by where it's stored, but by where it's made. If you made that money in Ohio, it's going to be taxed in Ohio. So that's one way we could get that $707 million back for our state budget.
Isn't the other side of this going to say that's going to create major headaches for accountants, trying to come up with two different kinds of filing rules for state and federal? I mean, isn't that the reason they pass this bill every couple of years?
I've heard that argument before. I think one of the ironies of all this is what could be more complicated than accountants coming up with fake corporations and fake P.O. boxes going from one country to another country to another country in order to avoid paying taxes. It seems to me that it would be easier for an accountant to be able to follow state law and follow federal law, even if they're different, than to come up with these elaborate schemes to move money around the world just so you could avoid paying the taxes to the people of Ohio.
When you say that Ohioans and small business pay this amount, is that they have to pay a higher tax rate then because the other corporations are paying such a low amount that they keep raising the tax rate to kind of make up the difference? I mean, how do you calculate that?
So the way we looked at it is looking at federal tax revenue that's generated, see what percentage of that tax revenue comes from the state of Ohio, and then dividing it up based on how many citizens there are in Ohio. So when we say the average Ohio taxpayer is paying an extra $700 a year in taxes because of tax dodging, that $700 could be that I'm paying $700 more every year in taxes, or I'm seeing $700 worth of cuts to my education system, to infrastructure, or $700 added to the deficit in my name. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
Okay. Yeah, so it's the way we break it down then is just to look at how much of the federal tax revenue Ohio is relied upon for, and then breaking that up between Ohioans, how much. So it's $150 billion federally that we're missing. So then breaking down that percentage for Ohio and then dividing it up among all the Ohioans. So, does that make more sense?
I think so.
Where does Ohio rank? I mean, if you look at all the states, I mean, how do we stack up to other states as far as this tax burden goes?
Yeah, so we're actually pretty high. Let's see, we are 10th out of 50 if you look at the additional tax burden by state. So $3.8 billion the state of Ohio is making up when it comes to tax haven abuse.